everyone, I'm Meg Tucker from Cook with Meg, and today I'm going to teach you how to make a homemade pie crust. I have my recipe beside me. This is always a good habit to keep your recipe nearby. Whether it's printed or on a tablet or a phone, it's great to glance at to make sure you've got all the right ingredients and that you're not missing any steps. Now I've ditched the chef coat. We're wearing an apron today. It is going to get a little floury in a fun way, but you want to make sure if you've got an apron, you are putting it on, or you're not wearing your very best clothes because it might get a little messy. The second thing, some people build their pie crust right on the countertop. I'm building mine in a bowl, but we will be moving it to the counter to bring it all together. So be sure you're working with a nice clean surface area. The main ingredient in today's crust, aside from flour, is butter, and you want your butter really, really cold. I just took this out of the fridge, so we're gonna work fairly quickly. And you also want ice cubes in some water because we want cold, cold butter and cold, cold water. But let's get started. The first thing we're going to add is flour. We need 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and I like to measure using a knife. Let's get ourselves situated here and dive right in. I flip my knife over and I just give my flour just a little tippity tap. We want to press out any little air pockets that may have gotten into the flour when we go to scoop it. So we need 2.5 cups, excuse me, of flour. I drag it across the top. It's a nice habit to get into. Whoops, just knowing that you're going to get like a nice even measurement. And we need 1/2 cup, so 2.5 cups total. This, by the way, is going to make 2 pie crusts. You can cut this certainly in half if you prefer to only make the 1 crust, but I like making 2. And then that way, I can keep one in the fridge or one in the freezer, and I can literally have pie crusts whenever I need it. Oh, I need a spatula, hang on. Excuse me. Okay, so spatula, wooden spoon, something to get us started, definitely very key. The next thing that we are going to add to our flour is a little bit of sugar. And I like to put about 1 tablespoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. And what that's going to do is it's just going to help balance this out. So we're not dealing with anything that's super sweet, but we're also not dealing with something that's very salty, but we want a nice flavor-rich crust. So let's give that a stir. When we come back, we're gonna add our butter and our water. And we're back. So gently stir this. You could certainly use a whisk if you really wanted to get this mega incorporated, but I find just a spatula is great. Again, a tablespoon of sugar and 1 teaspoon of salt. If this were for Thanksgiving and I were making a crust for, like, let's say pumpkin pie, I might add a little bit of cinnamon, maybe 1 teaspoon of cinnamon to the flour. Wouldn't that be nice? Just to give it like a little extra flavor. But this is just basic pie crust. We are now going to add butter. We have 1 cup of very cold butter that we've put diced into cubes. Now, some people like using butter, some people like using shortening, some people like using lard. I'm here to tell you that you can do any and all. I like a butter crust. I think it has a nice flavor. I will tell you that I have, more often than not, however, made a half butter, half shortening crust. The shortening helps with the crispy, the butter helps with the flavor. So totally up to you. Now I'm holding what's called a pastry cutter. These are under 10 bucks. If you can grab one, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it, maybe the dollar store even sells them. I think I've seen them there actually. And it's got blades. So what we're gonna do now is we have to do something called cutting the butter into the flour. If you don't have a pastry cutter, just grab 2 knives. I'm gonna show you both ways. What we're gonna do is we're just using our muscles. Stand up nice and straight, pull that stomach in, protect that back. And we're really just using kind of a twisting motion to literally cut through the butter and coat all those little butter chunks and little nuggets in flour. Because essentially when you make a pie crust, we want that butter to be nice and cold. Obviously, we're gonna work it a little bit and it is going to soften a tiny bit, but pie crusts get put into the fridge to get cold again. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep the butter itself as little pieces. You will see that when we get the pie crust made, you can actually see little streaks and little bits of the butter. When your pie crust gets rolled out, put into a pie plate, and then baked, we actually want those little bits of butter. They're like this. Pretend they're all like this. And then the steam, the hot from the oven is gonna make them be like, ooh, it's hot, it's hot. And then they start pushing out. And when they push out, they're releasing pockets of steam, and that creates your pockety, flaky pie crust because it pushes out and creates little layers. So that's why they say work with really cold butter and they say work fairly quickly. The reason I'm suggesting using a pastry cutter, metal blades. If you don't have a pastry cutter, knives, metal. We don't want to use our hands very much because we want the cold from the stainless steel, it's just like you're cutting your meat, to not warm the butter. That's why we don't do a lot of hand work when we are making a pie crust. You can literally cut right through the butter. Crisscross applesauce. I'll go back to this just for speed. If this is something you have in your house, please use it. If you like to make pie crusts and this is something that you think you want to get really into making all your own, definitely get one of these little pastry cutters. It's a great tool to have. And I'm sort of pushing in and twisting, and I'm going to show you here in just a minute the consistency that we're going for. Oh, I should also tell you that you can use a food processor. I mean a food processor. What I'm doing now is the pulse button, going to break it all up. It works the same. Today though, we're going old school. We're doing it ourselves. So I'm almost finished cutting in the butter. We want this to be a very sandy, crumbly, almost like oatmeal, almost like we've thrown a whole bunch of frozen peas into flour. That is actually the best analogy that I keep coming back to. We want it to be little tiny nuggets that are covered in flour. Be careful, these are blades. I'm gonna show you up close here what I mean in terms of texture. Let's show you. On your mat. Oliver, on your mat. Bubba, on your mat, please. Lay down. Okay, so in terms of texture, I've got very sandy little nuggets. I'll do a close-up shots here so you can see, but we're really dealing with little itty bitty nuggets, if you will, of butter that are covered. Not unlike my apron, which is already starting to get covered. All right, so we've done the flour, we've added the sugar, we've added the salt, we've cut in very, very cold butter. Now what we want to do is drizzle in very ice cold water a little bit at a time. The rule of thumb is usually 6 to 8 tablespoons, and I have my little tablespoon here. The first couple you can do like 2 or 3. 2. Try to keep track and try not to get any ice cubes in the water. And then we can go in with our spatula, and what we're trying to do here is let the moisture from the water connect and hit the butter and hit the flour and start to bring this mixture together. So obviously, flour is very puffy, it's very floury, literally. But what we're doing is we're taking down the dustiness by adding in droplets of that ice cold water. So keep in mind, you've done 3. There's 4, and I put a little ice in. I'm gonna fish that out. There's 5. I will go with 5 for now. Let's find that little ice cube. And then let's go back. Do you guys have pets? We have a black lab, Oliver, and he's over there on the couch. Sometimes he joins me in the kitchen. He's a kitchen pup, but we definitely make sure that he stays away from the food while we're cooking. All right, okay. We have 5 to 6 tablespoons in already. And now, indicative of my spatula with clean hands, I'm seeing that it is starting to stick to the spatula, which means it's time for us to get our hands in the bowl. Honestly, friends, your hands are the very best kitchen tool there is. So what I like to do at this point is just kind of get in there and start squishing it together. When you see that it starts to come together like that, you know we're getting close, but we still do need to add in a little bit more water. Not very much. This is where we're down to the last couple tablespoons. So I think that's 6. Bring it together. I don't pull it out onto the countertop yet. It's still a little too craggy and shaggy to do that. It also depends where we live, and we live in Alberta where the altitude is high, and when you have higher altitude, you definitely have a loss of moisture. So a lot of things get affected. Baking is one of the big things. So we often have to add a little bit more moisture to our stuff than maybe my family who lives in New Brunswick. All right, I feel like we're pretty much there. So what I'm going to do is very carefully, I'm going to bring this out onto my counter, but I want to put a little bit of flour down on the countertop, especially if you don't have this kind of a counter. You want to make sure that you are dealing with a surface that is not going to get too sticky. So let's get a little bit of flour. Let's put a little flour out on our surface. Clean hand, just a little bit. Keep your water on hand. You may still need a little bit of water. And let's very carefully bring that onto your counter surface. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, Meg, there's no way that's going to come together. And I will tell you, you might need one more little bit of your ice water. This is an opportunity where it's a little more spread out. You can kind of dribble. That should probably be enough. We're gonna kind of work it until it becomes a dough that will stick together. And again, a little bit of working will bring it together. We definitely don't want to add more flour, but we also don't really want to add more water because we have a whole cup of butter in there and it's already starting to come together. Use your hands to pull it together, kind of fold it together, give it a squish, move it into each other. And what I do is I kind of lean on it and I use my hands and my body to kind of push down and then pick up all the little straggly pieces. See what I'm doing here? We're sort of using this to pick up or mop up any of the little straggly bits. So there we have it. It's put together. I would say I can pick that up. That's pretty successful. If you feel like your counter surface is a little bit sticky, dip in with a spoon into your flour bag or your canister and get a little bit more flour. We are not making bread. We don't want to develop a whole bunch of gluten here. We're making a pie crust, so we don't want to overwork this. What I will do is grab a little spoon, dip in with a teeny bit more flour, just a little, and give it a tiny little dusting. Please remember that every amount of flour that you put down on your counter, that pie dough is going to soak up. and we don't want to over flour the dough. So what we're gonna do is we've got it together. It's looking gorgeous, but it's one giant piece. We need to cut this in half. So what I've got is a little, I call it a bench scraper. If you don't have a bench scraper, maybe you can just use a butter knife. We're gonna eyeball this. We're gonna cut this in half. That's probably half. If you were wanting to be super specific, you could certainly use a scale, a kitchen scale. But we basically wanna make this into two, excuse me, little discs. They're gorgeous. If I held that up, you can actually see the little bits of butter. Again, we haven't overworked it. And we just want to take little pie discs. So you sort of form it, if you can, as best you can, into a little bit of a round circle. That helps us out when it goes to roll. It's already in circle form. And then just press down ever so slightly to bring it into like a little disc. Like so. I'm gonna grab some plastic wrap. I'll meet you back here and we'll get these babes wrapped up and into the fridge. All right, I've got cling wrap, plastic wrap, whatever you've got on hand. We're gonna take each one of those. Oh, you know what? I wanna show you something. This is really evident here. You can literally see the little bits of butter throughout the pie crust. That's the mark that we didn't over mix it. So let's wrap each little disc, each little baby up in some plastic wrap. And then if you have a storage bag, we're going to pop those into a storage bag, especially if you're not using these pie crusts right away. Sometimes I even double wrap. So what you want to do is you want to put that into the fridge for at least an hour to get it cold again before you go to roll it out. Pie crusts need to get chilly once again. So what I do at that point is I kind of press them down even more, just so they're actual little discs. I would say they are very close to being even in size. And then these little babes, homemade pie crust, ready for the fridge, or I would put them in a storage bag into the freezer until you're ready to use them. So again, at least an hour, up to a couple of days in the fridge, beyond a couple of days, certainly into the freezer. When you are ready to use them, bring them to chilly temperature. I wouldn't say room temperature, but certainly chilly temperature, and then put some flour down on your counter before rolling them out and getting them into your pie plates. Happy cooking, happy baking, happy pie making. For more with me, cookwithmeg.com. And until next time, I will see you in the kitchen. Happy pie making.